This picture you see on the cover is actually a county road project we did in last fall out in Thurston County. About this very same time last year. Thurston County, which is Olympia, Washington. That's the county seat for Thurston County. And you can see that picture really doesn't do it justice. That curve is a lot, that grade is a lot steeper than it looks in this picture. And you notice we just did one side here. Now this was actually done under a contract. This was a demo project that we actually gave to Thurston County. So we actually paid for that and contracted it and all that sort of thing. The second one they did, we actually had the county do it. So I'll get into that a little bit later. County forces actually installed. So I always start off with, and this way I was told, to give kind of a national picture of what's going on for the states. And what you'll see is a busy thing. It's not really much for a presentation. It's kind of a record-keeping thing. It's color-coded based on how many curves have been installed. And then there's even a little caveat on top of that, that gold star versus the black star. These are just active states, very active letting projects. Gold is really over 100 type curves. You can see that I put Tennessee in that because I know what Danny's got. He's got like 400 curves out there, I think, under contract. And so if he's not there yet, he's there pretty soon. So we had to put the gold star on Tennessee as well. But our leaders have been Kentucky and California, really. And now we've got a lot of states coming on, like Pennsylvania. They've led about 100 projects this year. So they've really been very active. They've had a very public declaration. They think it's the way to go. They've seen outstanding results in their projects. They did an evaluation. I'll talk about one of their projects, a couple of their projects actually. You see we got some states that really aren't getting it yet. North Dakota being in red. But oftentimes those are the less, less heavily traveled routes in a lot of cases. New Mexico's coming on, they're getting ready to do stuff. There's a lot of different states are in different phases. This has been updated pretty recently, but you'll see right here, Arkansas, I think within another month or two, they'll probably be moving to the next category into the blue. They have started this year and just really put in a lot of projects. So these things can turn around pretty quick. Now, high friction surface treatments, basically, it's not a pavement treatment that happens to have safety benefits. And a lot of things we do with pavement will improve safety. What we really need to focus on, it is a safety treatment that happens to be a pavement. That sounds very cliche, but that is really the only motivation for why you would use it. You really want to do it for safety treatment. It's a very thin overlay. You saw it's like put a piece of sandpaper out there. Some people actually akin it more to a roof shingle, but because of the thickness. But in essence, the motivation for this is strictly safety. The reason I say that, because it's another process we do on bridge preservation, which is done for a different reason. Okay? Also, it may have some, it's kind of like that first one, it may have some safety benefits. But in reality, this motivates it. This is what makes it eligible for the safety funds. There's a crash problem. Okay? Now, it still has to work like a pavement. It has to last like a pavement. And that's one of the big keys to this. We want it to last, quite a while. You put something out there that only lasts a short period of time, what have you accomplished? So this is the key to this. Not only do you have the high friction, but it also will have a lot of longevity. Now, where do we use it? Well, primarily horizontal curves, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. You'll see the numbers, you'll understand it. But we also do it on intersections. We can have tremendous benefits on intersections. Probably not going to save as many, because fails are not as many in the intersections as there are in curves. I'll give you the numbers in a few minutes. But also grades. We have problems around grades as well. So oftentimes we do that, and more often than not, when you get all three of these together, which by the way happens quite frequently, you can see these are all really high-risk locations. Okay? So this is, and this is when the pavement is a marginal friction affected by weather. This is when, okay, you've got that location, and all of a sudden you start having crashes every time it rains. Well, this is the indicator that your pavement is polishing. Because when you get wet weather, wet pavement, just a small amount of water can lower the friction characteristics of a pavement by 20 to 30%. We're talking about 0.02 of an inch, which is very slight. Can absolutely lower your 20 to 30% reduction in your friction characteristics. And why? That's not hydroplaning, that's lubrication. Okay? So this is something that this will be your tell. Guess what? That pavement's not going to heal itself. It's not going to get any better. And it's going to go to this next category, which is low friction. You won't have to wait for rain. Okay? You start having people sliding off the roadway in dry weather. Okay? I'll show you a video one later where that occurs. Now, there's another thing that a lot of people, this is the hidden thing about friction, people aren't aware of. The friction values are not compatible with the approach speeds and geometrics. This is what we call friction demand. Designers, I heard a bunch of designers in the room all know about Green Book. If you read Green Book, it talks about friction demand, right? What is friction demand? That is the friction we need to keep the vehicle on the roadway. Now we can quantify that. And it works in relationship with super elevation. They act on a one-to-one relationship, okay? There's a lot of advantages there. I've got a Q&A that will, I'm not really, that's, when I get into why it works and all that stuff, that's what I usually talk about. But I'm not going to get into that today because my charge was to really talk about what other people are doing around the country. So I'm going to hit more with that. Now, why do we look at curves? 28% of all fatalities in the United States occur in a curve. Well, that wouldn't be all that bad if 28% of the roadways were curves, but really it's only about 5% are in curves. The roadway mileage, about 5% are curves. So what do we have? Way over representation. Now, and when you look at that 5%, you start breaking it down. We've had states that do these studies. Every curve had a problem. Minnesota did a study. 50% of their curves didn't even have a crash. By the way, they looked at local roads as well. 50% didn't even have a crash. Not a crash. So what does it tell us? We're starting to focus it down to a small set of bad actors. All right? We can then treat this. Okay? We don't have to do every curve. We don't have to do every road. We can really have a huge effect. We looked at that 28%. That's a small number of the curves that are creating most of these problems. Now, when you consider there's 10 million curves in the United States, that's an estimate, of course, then, quite frankly, that's still a large number of curves, but it's not all 10 million. Okay? So, this is one of the things we can work at. Now, not only is it, and you'll see this in a lot of the numbers we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is that not only is it fatal crashes, but you have, by rate, 3 times as many crashes that occur if you do a tangent section. Now, those of you who have low volume roads, that's a 4 times as many. That 3 times as many is interstates all the way through. But when you just look at low volume roads, there's 4 times as many crashes. Okay. Now, let's look at functional class, because I was anticipating a lot of local people here, and I always like to point out that when you look at the United States, if you take local roads, this is by functional classification, you take local roads and you take collectors, you add those up, that's 54% of the fatal crashes occur on those 2 systems. Now, one of the reasons for that is that they're about 80% of the roads. Okay? So what does that tell us? We've got them scattered out. Now, if you find a cluster of crashes or in a curve on those systems, this is a surefire candidate. So these are things to look at. Well, we can't just look at the big road. We need to come up with a system, and that's what we're going to talk about, is this is a way to attack that problem. That is, do a self-introduction. Well, this is just a blow-up of that so you can see the numbers. Now, if we do a self-installation, we feel like that cuts the cost about 50%, and it makes it doable for local governments. So why does that work? Because on local roads, less traffic, so it's easier to get out there. And oftentimes we find that we only need a small amount of material on the local road system because you don't have 6 lanes of interstate, or you don't have, 10,000 cars a minute or whatever like we do on some of the freeways. So in essence, it really is it's a different paradigm than what we have for state systems. So it does lend itself more to a self-install. Now, Tennessee curve fatalities. This is a cumulative number. If you take 2010 and you add the numbers up through 2012, all the fatalities, there's 2,983 fatalities. So that's a cumulative number for those 3 years. Now, out of that number, 1,083 fatalities, which is 36%, occurred in curves. Now, the national average is 28. You're at 36. So you definitely need to be looking at this treatment. 70% of these are on rural roadways. What does that tell you? 30% were in urban. Okay? You typically don't associate fatalities that much with urban areas. But I'm going to show you some in a minute, some curves in urban areas where we've had dramatic effect. Now, nearly 42% of these occurred on roads functionally classed as local or collector. Now, in some states, I'd say most states, the collector system is usually split between the state and the local governments. Usually your minor collectors usually end up on the local governments, and the major collectors end up on the state system. But it just depends on the state. I see, like you go to Florida, all the collectors are on the local road system. In Georgia, where I spent a lot of time, is split. And if you're not familiar with functional classifications, that doesn't mean local roads in the sense that I own the local road. That's not the, it's based on the type of traffic and the distribution of the traffic. So anyway, there are maps that show where all those are. I know all the state guys can help you with that. Now, I'm going to show you a video. This is a skid test. It was done, this particular case, this was a fatal crash location. And a guy had lost control, and it was posted 30 miles an hour. And he had lost control, and he says, he swore up and down, oh yeah, I was going 30 miles an hour. And he said, nobody believed it. Guess what? They were going after him criminally. They killed, someone got killed. There was already one tragedy. Now they're going after this guy who was driving the other vehicle into the curve. And his lawyer, retained a lawyer, maybe one of the good things the lawyer did, because there's not a lot of them. So he did a good thing. He said, you know what, something wrong here. So he called in an outside independent company, a company called ICC, which is International Cybernetics. They do skid tests all over the United States, and they came in and run skid tests. Now, how many of you ever seen a skid trailer in action? Familiar with it? Good, good. What you'll notice in this video, let me just show the video, then we'll talk about it a little bit. This is in the off direction of what we call a marginal friction value. Now, run about a 28. That's a 28 rating, okay? Now, this is the other direction. This is the direction of the crash. If you see a skid trailer that is not supposed to pass the truck, okay? And this one was an 8. Ice is 10, okay? Now, notice they put water down. That's what you're measuring. This is the worst case scenario, it's wet. Now, this is what happens at 30 miles an hour. This was at 30 miles an hour. Normally, we measure them at 40. But because of the severity of the curve, they had to be. And this is on a local road. You know, guess which state it's in? Tennessee. Yeah. One of the things with local roads, because they are lower volume, they don't get resurfaced a lot. And for that reason, oftentimes they tend to polish with less, just more wear. You don't have the heavier loads or whatever. And maybe they didn't have the best pavement to start with, the best characteristics. Because there's structural aspects of aggregate, and then there's the friction characteristics of aggregate. So there's two different things, and they're not necessarily, you got a tremendous effort to make them be the same, okay? And they're not. So now I'm going to give you a couple of projects. This one is a good example of what we just saw. This is a solution. This is actually in Pennsylvania. It's probably one of my favorite projects. I think if you've ever listened to one of our webinars, you've probably seen this project. And this is one of those, this is the ones I really love. This is the first project done in Pennsylvania. This is the one that launched them into high friction as we know it today. And this was a demo actually, but they had, this location had been, it was their number 2 worst location in the district. Number 2. Now this has a lot of coal trucks on it. In fact, let me put it up here. A lot of trucks hauling, you can see fairly good traffic on this, 5,000. And 8% trucks, and it's all coal trucks, and they're driving fast, okay? Now, this particular location, you can see they've got chevrons, what look like 10-foot centers there. I mean, they've got them all over the place. They put in guardrail, they've done extra striping, they've got rumble strips. They've even got this experimental design. You see this slow arrow coming to a curve. This was something that was being tried. Pennsylvania thought it was pretty effective. It's not been accepted for use. In fact, I think it was rejected. But in essence, they had done everything they could do. They didn't know what else to do. Okay? Came in and did a high friction project here. Whoop, back up. What they did, they installed it July the 13th, 2007. 200 square yards. They did it in one direction. These crashes here were only in one direction. There was one crash in the opposite direction. Why? Downhill into a curve to the right. If you don't make the curve to the right, you're head on into the other direction. Okay? There were several fatals in this area. Head on with a coal truck, not so good. Now, look at all the stuff they've done here. They've done everything they could do. All the things they could think of short of rebuilding. They've got a historic property on both sides of this road. They can't really do a realignment. And so consequently, they said, let's try it. 200 square yards. 200 square yards is a minute project. How many yards did you do out there, Danny? Probably 50?
35.
Yeah, somewhere in that range, 35. Okay. So you can see that's the size of that project out there. So in essence, this is a really, really small application. They haven't had a crash at this location yet since they've installed this. That made a believer out of it. So they went ahead and did 12 more projects to evaluate it, all highly successful. That's why they just did 100 projects last year. Okay. Now here's another project in Pennsylvania. After the last webinar I did for local governments, I actually gave that story a few more slides involved. Guy up there, I'll show you him in a minute, is our champion, said, you know, we've done a lot more projects since that when you keep using that same project. I said, well, it's my favorite project. He said, well, here's one that you might want. I said, because on the other one, the cops actually came to him on the first one and said, this is great stuff. We don't know what it is, but we need to do more of this, you know. So I said, that's great stuff, you know, because people noticed it. You know, the cops like it. This is great because they know where the crashes are. He said, well, I got a cop you ought to get. So we got a camera crew to go up there and videotape this. This is the location. And when I show you this video, I want you to watch what happens around this intersection. This is a curve coming, this is a freeway over. It has nothing to do with this curve, other than the fact that we had to put guardrail in here to protect the bridge piers. But you got a road cutting off here. How many of you guys have a road like that in your jurisdiction? Pretty much everywhere. Everybody's got one of these, right? Watch what happens. This is the champion in Pennsylvania named Stephen Pahowski. Wonderful guy. He gets it. Wonderful guy. He's the unsung hero in Pennsylvania. He's the guy that got him to do it. Now, the deputy, engineer is great. He gets up and makes all the speeches, but this is the guy that made it happen. Okay? Oh, no sound.
We are very excited about using high friction surface treatment. We chose this particular curve because it's a unique crash history. There was a majority of crashes were occurring in wet conditions. In fact, over a 3-year period, there were 26 crashes.
Since I've been here as the chief of police, this intersection has been very problematic for us. We frequently would have to park a marked unit there with the emergency lights on to try to slow people down. It was not the speed that the vehicles were traveling. It was the road surface being wet that contributed to the accidents. We contacted the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, spoke with Steve Pahowski, an engineer, and we worked together to come up with some kind of solution.
This is the automated installation you're
low-cost
seeing.
safety improvements for over 10 years, and I've never seen such an immediate positive response to a safety treatment.
Notice anything about the geometrics of that curve?
On curves, we've seen a day and night difference in accident reduction and even elimination. Quite simply, it stops crashes from occurring.
Absolutely consider this road surface material. This eliminated our accidents. Since the material's been applied, we've had, I believe, only one reportable accident at that location. So it basically eliminated all accidents there.
I talked to this police chief on the phone. He said, yeah, we had that one crash. He said, some guy from New York, he's lost. You know where he was going. So, yeah, so they even got to write that one off. Just a summary. This is what they just told you in the video. Now, this is the ADT, and this is the, 3 years prior, they had 26 crashes in that one spot, okay? And then, of course, since they had that one guy from New York that had a crash. But
The crash that was just 200 square yards, right?
no, that one was a bigger project. That one was the first project was 200 square yards. I'm not sure about that one, but it was a lot more.
Yeah.
But did anybody notice the geometrics in that curve? Is that one picture? What happens a lot of times where you have an intersection and a curve, you lose your super elevation. When you lose your super elevation, you have to compensate with friction to keep the vehicle on the road. And when you do that, that starts to polish the pavement. That accelerates the pavement. The friction demand at that spot is greatest. This is high friction. This is what it does. It resists that. It gives you that higher friction value to compensate. So not only does it deteriorate, keep it from deteriorating the friction value, but it actually jacks up the friction. Okay? Now, that was a kind of a rural, outside a small town. I'm going to show you another urban scenario. But this is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. People always say, well, what about snow plows? You don't get a lot more snow than Wisconsin, okay? And here's a famous Marquette interchange. It was designed for context-sensitive solutions. Some of these curves are affected. The sheriff from Milwaukee always complains about the fact every time they have a crash here, shuts the whole road down because it's a blind curve, okay? And he was really complaining about it. He actually came out and complained nationally about that design. But they were trying to weave in between existing homes and businesses or whatever. So context sensitive. So what they did, every time it rained up here, crashes galore. Now what you're going to see here is our buddies at ITS have gone out and videotaped this curve. This is live crashes. And you'll notice every time they come around here in the rain, you'll start seeing them sliding out. Thank goodness we have good barriers there. They weren't killed, they were just injured. A lot of them were PDOs, just damaged the vehicle and drove away. What's amazing about this is that there's not multiple fatalities here. Now this is only 7 crashes. There's 219 in 3 years. This is one spot. That was an injury crash right there, high angle impact into the barrier.
Just 2 at a time.
By the way, this is all wet. None of it's ice or snow. It's just all water. Here's looking at it from the other direction. Now watch this guy. This is the last one. In a pickup truck. Whenever you see headlights do this, blind curve or not, slow down. When they're coming at you around that road, you need to back up. Now, yeah.
This was after they reconstructed?
No, this was before.
Before they reconstructed the
Yeah.
interchange?
Yeah, this is, after we treated it, let me just give you the numbers. Let me blow that up for you. This is a report from Wisconsin DOT. Prior to the installation, by the way, they plotted it out here, you can see really the big drop. You know, the installation, they had 219 crashes at that one spot. After, you know, we had 9. I think the problem there was friction. In fact, we have the numbers to show that it was. And of course, this was a calcined bauxite, high friction surface treatment. Kind of an amazing statistic. And by the way, I actually have, because of the cameras already, I have the videos of the crashes that occurred afterwards. The very first one that occurred after was a truck who lost its load. We're not going to affect that, okay? The second one was a lady who just never steered, never hit the brakes, went slam right into the wall. Just straight through the curb, bam. Went to sleep, I don't know. But she didn't hit her brakes. And high friction, you still got to hit your brakes. You still got to participate a little bit, okay? Now, I'm going to give you a couple other projects. This is changing of scale a little bit, because now we're going to talk about saving money, okay? Now, this is in your handout, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. This is in your handout. This is something that's on our website as well, but this was done as part of the California program. And this is an interesting one because, you know, the title says, a life-saving, cost-effective solution for environmentally sensitive locations. This is in right on the Oregon-Northern California border. National parks, you got these big redwood trees, you know, massive trees. The most pristine river in Northern California, the Smith River, runs right along this road. To say that the park people are a little sensitive about this is an understatement, okay? They are basically rabid about preserving this area. In fact, there's a lot of people that are very sensitive about this area. And here's the big part. Here's what it looks like on the ground. This is one of those I love. They had done everything they could. They had gone in and put in signs galore. I mean, how many times do you see Chevron double stacked for a road like this? You know? and they've done rumble strips. They actually, what we would call an open grade friction course. They call it open grade asphalt cement or something like that. They got a different, it's in the flyer. They use a different term than we do, but that's the same as an open grade friction course. Now, this is not that big of a curve. Here it is. You can see this is an aerial looking down, pretty much on a cliff on this side. This is the Smith River, you know, mountains up above it. Now, here's the thing about this location. If they were going to reconstruct it, they had gone through, they were thinking, at this point, we tried everything, we're not changing the crash profile. And this had been a problem for a long time. Even after they put the open grade in, they still had problems. It did not change the crash pattern. And they had tremendous crashes here for that side road. And they were basically thinking about rebuilding it. They had gone through the process of starting preliminary plans. What we've got to do this. It was going to take forever because of the environmental process. So, you know, it's in a really tough spot. And so they were looking at maybe taking 2 to 5 years for the environmental review. Yeah. And the construction duration, another 6 months to reconstruct it. And the thing about it was they were going to close the road. It was a massive, I think it was like 8-hour detour around this thing. Unbelievable. Because this is through a pristine area. There's not a lot of networks of roads. You can just go over a few blocks and get on. This was like the way to get through there. And so they were looking at that. Now, they had estimated it was going to cost $14 million. They ended up doing it with the high friction for less than $250,000. It was about $239,000. Now, why there? Staging was somewhat, they were able to keep a lane open for the entire duration. So they just didn't have about a 5-minute delay to go through there. So really negligible to what was the other option. They used a double layer because of the open grade friction course. It requires that we come back and fill the voids in on that. So it takes a little bit more material to do it. So it is a little bit pricier. But they could have actually overlaid the roadway with pavement and it would have still been cost effective because the other option was $14 million. And they actually just said, well, let's try this. Because otherwise we're going to be experiencing crashes for almost 6 years. And you know, they were having pretty good crashes. 26 crashes. Since they put this in, I think I've got that on, nope. Where did I put that? They installed it in the summer of 2012. Since they put that in, they haven't had a crash. Everything they had done did not change the crash pattern. Okay? Since they put this in, goose egg. So, you can see that. Now, this is another little closer to home here. You might have even been through this one. This one is in South Carolina. It's near the North Carolina border. Again, saving money. This location has been a problem forever. It's a curve on US 25. I mean, it goes back in history as being a problem. And they knew they needed to do something. They thought they were going to have to reconstruct it. Again, detour being a problem. It was some major issues with drainage because the slope, and they didn't, when they originally put a barrier, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, they didn't put drainage in the median. And so water was running down the road. So actually the state called me and said, we'd done a project there that was very successful, their first project, this was their second project, and they said, do you think this will work? I said, it'll probably help, but it's not going to be as effective as it would be otherwise. Because you've got times where you got water standing on the road. So it's not going to be totally effective. So I said, they said, well, we're going to give it a try. Now, this, at the time when this was done, it was the biggest project for high friction ever. It's a mile-long, 4-lane section completely. We don't typically do that. This is multiple curves, okay? This is a little unusual. Also, this has the claim to being the very first automated installed high-friction project in the United States. Probably in the world, because nobody else has done it except for us anyway. So you can see quite a bit of savings here, because it was going to cost them $5 million to rebuild it, and it did end up costing them $1 million to do this. Okay? But $5 million, they just couldn't move forward with it. It was sitting there. They could not move forward with it at all. Now, they didn't have the money to do it, but $1 million they could come up with. Okay? So, this is what it looked like. Here's the section of roadway. You can see Greenville is on the south of this, and then you can see the border right here. This is the section road. That's a very long section for a high friction project. Here's what it looks like on the ground. See this little narrow shoulder? What happens, where does the water go on the cross slope? If it gets on that inside, it runs down the road. In fact, you'll see it right here. water comes across here, it has no drainage in here. Where does it do? It goes down this inside till it crosses the road down here. This is not a good activity. Site distance issues, you had access issues. So there's a lot of things causing crashes here. And I didn't really expect high friction to solve all of them. It helps solve them, but it won't solve them 100%. So what they found is, they did a before and after. And again, let me point out these numbers. These are what we call a naive study. This is 3 years before, 3 years after. No empirical bays, any of that sort of thing. So it's just really, you might have regression to the mean, and everybody says, well, that's just a naive study. But I've done hundreds of these naive studies. I've seen hundreds of them. They're always like this. So at some point you're saying, it's not a regression to the mean here. This is absolutely just knocking it out. So you look at 68% reduction in wet crashes, 56% reduction in total crashes. Okay? And this is a fabulous. Now, after this project, they were glowing with success because they had not been able to do anything there. They'd done a lot of stuff on that one trying to make it safer. The reason that concrete barrier was there to start with is because before they put that in, they were hitting each other head on. Okay? That's why that went in. But later, after they had completed about 7 projects, they found a total, including this project, so this is a little bit lower than their average. They basically had an 81% reduction in wet crashes, and 71% reduction in total crashes in 7 projects. That's when they decided to go mainstream with it. Okay. Now, I'm not going to give you a specific project I usually do, but on Kentucky, they've got so many good ones. I was just up in Kentucky recently and put together some numbers. Actually, they put together the numbers and handed them to me because I asked them for an update. This is actually looking at 70 curves, 1 intersection. So 71 total projects. And so what you see here is, this is the total numbers right here. Now, I should point out, they're all on different time frames. They always use 3 years before, and then why 70 is because it was 3 years after. They cut it off. They have 160 projects, but they don't have 3 years of data afterwards. So this is strictly the ones that had 3 years before, at a minimum of 3 years after. Because some of these were installed in 2009, and they're still working great. So, in essence, then they took, because they're on different time frames, they took an average. Okay? They took an average of each year. So they could combine them, put them on the same basis to combine them. So this is 1 year. What you see in these numbers, this is your average. If you look at all these, if you look at the total average, there was 277 crashes in those curves in 1 year. That's an average of 1 year. Now, they've broken down by ramps and curves. When they first did, we got the first information from Kentucky, it was a lot of ramps in there. A lot of their projects are small projects. They're on 2-lane roads, probably less than 1,000 square yards. A lot of them. So you see a lot of smaller curves. That's what you normally see over here in curves. A lot of 2-lane road projects in Kentucky. Way more than you see in a lot of states. But here's their after. Notice what we've got here. That's a huge number of reductions across your state in doing this. There's one project, there was their second installation. They told me that one project has paid for all the other installations just in the life saving. It was a massive, it was a 2-lane road project, but it had a lot of crashes on it. So that's just in savings of lives and injuries. That one project has saved enough money, if you compared it to user costs, to pay for all these projects. That's amazing. Now, if you want to look at percentages, let's just go to this. Here's your wet all, 90%. But if you look at total average, this is wet and dry, 87%. You can see phenomenal numbers. It depends on how complicated the roadway is that you're putting this on, as to what kind of numbers you're going to get. If there's a lot of other reasons why it happens, friction may help them to stop and may help them control, but it won't necessarily stop like access control issues. It's not going to solve that problem necessarily. Okay? Now, what is a high friction treatment? I'm just going to hit a couple bullets out of this because Danny talked about it a good bit already. But it really has 2 characteristics. This is an exceptional aggregate. Now this aggregate, we can even go into where it comes from and how it's made and all that, which I'm not putting in this presentation. But in essence, it is got special features. It's a special thing. It's not just something you can find, in a quarry somewhere. It's actually an artificial aggregate. It's made from bauxite, and the heating process is heated up very high temperatures, drives the water and moisture out of it, makes it very hard, and then somebody here from Alcoa, Tennessee, This is basically 87% aluminum oxide. So therefore, it lasts very well for us. This is probably the best. If you go into any shop, you pull out a carbon blade that's made out of the same process, it's just fused, where this is made into a different, the same material, they just treat it differently. So if you've got a maintenance shop, you got a carburetor blade, same stuff. So this is used primarily for abrasives. Exceptional skid properties and longevity, that's the two things you need to remember. To be high friction, that's what you have to have. It's got to last. We generally apply this in spot locations. You saw a couple of projects that were bigger than spots, but for more often than not, they're small installations. We're not resurfacing the world with this, okay? Try not to anyway. We use a different kind of binder. You saw Danny's binder right there. Predominantly, I thought probably 90% of what's out there is being done with epoxy. And by the way, epoxy is not just one thing. There's all kind of formulations of epoxy, have different characteristics. They're all bid equal right now. But some have better characteristics for some types of work than others. So there's a lot of variation there. That's a whole separate materials issue. Now here's the key to this thing. Thin, I mentioned this earlier, it's like sandpaper or roof shingle. It's about 3 millimeters. We call it a 3 millimeter overlay. 50% of that is the binder depth. You want the aggregate embedded 50% to hold it. Why do we use epoxy? Because we're going to be loading this. It's really a shear force. When you got braking and you got side friction, it's really shear. Asphalt does not provide shear strength. It doesn't have that. Okay, very low. This is very high shear strength. Okay? This is what it looks like. You've seen it enough. I won't stand with that. This was what's the spec that Danny worked on, led the group for. This is what we came up with. Now, several states are actually increasing that. They've got enough experience now. Kentucky was telling me they may go up to 75 instead of 65. This is just a test that you have to have testing to basically keep people honest. I mean, the contractor will give you anything. This is some pictures from Thurston County. If you're doing a manual installation, you can see your rates, depending on your crew's experience, a big variety of rates here, simply because you get a big variety of crew experience. That's going to also make a difference in your quality. I've been around a lot of these guys installing this. These guys in the county were motivated. I'd take them anywhere. We did a little training with them. They own this road. They do a better job than a contractor would do, I'll tell you this. This is a project where we had the contractor install one and they installed the second one. They did a better job for their first job than the contractor did. This is great. And I'll tell you what else is great about a county job. We bring in a contractor, we're probably going to stretch the limits on where we're going to go. We're going to probably go out a little further this way and a little further this way because we don't want to pay mobilization twice. County, come in and minimize, do the smallest amount possible. You're already there. Come back if you need to add some more. If it didn't work as good, because we do know sometimes we might need to go ahead of the curve, a little bit, maybe 100 feet, because that's where the vehicles are braking, okay? If you're in the county, shorten it up, you're there. Come back and do something later if you need it. If it's not getting what you thought you should get, do some more. So you're going to save a lot of money doing it yourself, more than just in the labor, okay? Now, this is the mechanically assisted installation. Danny's got a contract now. Right now, you got mechanically assisted in your contract. And this is one of the manufacturers. He actually has a boom where he spreads the rock out. You see it's kind of like a salt spreader. They also have a pump. The big jump from a manual installation to this is the mixer. Getting a good mixer on this makes all the difference in the world. This is a bigger project, so therefore you're going to want something to move it a little quicker. All the material's in the truck. You're not out there with wheelbarrows and doing this with your hands. This thing is spread it out. Now they still are going to have to use squeegees here to set it. They're still going to have to level this aggregate out. And yes, they can screw it up. They've done it several times. You still have a little bit higher risk than you will with the Ultimate, in my mind. Here's a second method. This is a spray-on method. And what we got here is a compressor that actually sucks the rock up and sprays it out there. Now, it's very slow. If you get in one of these, I would almost suggest you look at 2 of these because, and if you get a dusty material, it's a cloud of dust. you have to kind of concern yourself a little bit about that. There's some things, there's tricks in all these things you need to be aware of, but this is just another method. Now, this group particularly, they did hand mix the epoxy, and they did still squeegee it, but the only difference here is they did the mechanical assistant with the blower. They were fortunate, they had a shoulder. They could bring a truck right alongside and blow it out real easy. I've seen other people do this with a extended pipe out of the back, where they, you know, because they didn't have it was like nowhere to go on the side of the road, so they basically had to stay in the lane. So that's a little bit of an issue. But that's pretty, you know, let's just point it out that, you know, this pump is a big jump forward if you can get that, and in this case they didn't. Most of the people that do this full-time will have some sort of methodology for mixing it better than just with a hand mix type situation. Now here's what we call the ultimate. This is the automated installation. This requires a pretty good investment to have a truck. But what you saw in that video earlier that you saw in Pennsylvania, it just drops the material. It's very engineered. Again, it's got a pump, but the pump distributes the material across the roadway evenly. And it measures the depth as it places. None of the other systems do that. This one actually gives you a printout of how much material is going through there, what the temperature was, you name it. It's got everything in the world on it. And their production rates, I don't think they know how much they can put down yet. I mean, this is 2,800 square yards, but I think we're exceeding that in some cases. As this system gets better and better, this is probably going to go up. We just came online. There's 3 companies that do this. They all have different vehicles. They're all different, work on different principle. DBI out of Pennsylvania, THM out of Texas, and ACC out of California. Every one of them does a very similar work, but they have different aspects on how they distribute the material. The latest truck is probably even going to be faster than this. This is the one that was just recently coming on the market. Why would you, that's it going down, by the way, let me back that up. You can see this is the material, the bar that's putting the epoxy down. Here's the aggregate. Now, this is really critical when you get to higher temperatures, also when you're on steep super elevations, because the aggregate getting into that epoxy doesn't give it long to run across the roadway. Keep in mind, you were looking at flat. Put it on a steep slope. In a warm day, the viscosity goes up, and boom, this thing wants to go down the slope pretty quick. So you have to watch that. Now that's, by the way, this is a project in Ohio that was done many, many years ago, Hamilton County. One of the things about counties, they make a decision, they can do it. They're a little more autonomous than states. Got material people, construction people. Everybody has to kind of get along. Counties, you know, one guy wears that hat today and Amari wears another hat, right? So you can actually be a little more flexible. I find counties to be more innovative. They can try things a lot easier than a state can. May not have the money all the time to do it, but they tend to be a little bit more flexible. Unless you're Danny Lane.